I'm Andrew Austin, and this is the Freedom and Reason Podcast. Welcome to the show. I've been talking lately about the COVID-19 crisis that we're facing, and I wrote a piece, I guess it was yesterday or the day before on my blog, and then my last podcast covered this, that looked at the question of herd immunity and whether we were going to be able to achieve that, given that the lockdown meant that we were limiting the number of people who could contract the virus. Well, we don't actually know how many people have contracted the virus. I used, based on the confirmed cases, I used a factor of 10 to work out that percentage. And of course, it was very low. It was less than 2%. And we need herd immunity around 70 to 90%. But in today's show, what I want to do is consider what the actual number of cases may be. And this is a new virus, and so we don't have a lot of experience with it. But it is a virus. It is an RNA virus, as I've already talked about. And so we have dealt with RNA viruses for decades. Humans have for centuries. Millennia, and so we can do some sort of rough thinking about it, and with caveats that we should constantly keep in mind about that these are just approximations, but they're very important for understanding the relative risk of the problem. So I have a blog entry on this. And the title of the blog entry is "We Should Stop Citing the Case-Lethality Rate for COVID-19 or Start Using It for Influenza," at least in the discussion presently, so that people can get a sense of relative risk, because there's a lot of fear that's being spread by a very high case lethality rate. And by case lethality rate, I mean a death rate that's calculated based on the number of confirmed cases. So the CDC estimates that for the 2019-2020 flu season, and the last surveillance point for this was April 4th. That's from the end of September in 2019. So they bring it up to April 4th. There were 39 million flu illnesses. And the number of positive tests for the flu is to date 291,241. So I want to refer to the positive test as the flu cases, and then talk about the estimate, the 39 million, as flu illnesses, just to make the discussion clear. Well, that's quite a discrepancy if you think about the difference between 39 million versus 291,241. And I'll explain this in a moment, why there's this discrepancy. Now, the CDC attributes 24,000 deaths to the flu so far this season. That's a case lethality rate of 9.7%, or roughly one dead for every 10 persons who test positive. That's a shocking statistic. If that was being reported by the media, there would be a considerable panic in the population. However, based on the number of actual illnesses, the death rate is 0.75%, so less than 1 in 100. This multiple is used this year to estimate actual cases from positive cases, and it's a factor of 134. So 134 times is the estimate of the actual illnesses versus the cases that we have, and those cases are based on both clinical and public health confirmations. Now, there are complex reasons why this number is utilized. You can read about the mathematical models used to estimate by following the CDC page that I've supplied on my blog, and I'll put it in the section below this video. Suffice it to say that the model was developed because epidemiologists are aware that there are far fewer cases confirmed by testing that actually exists in the population, obviously, because people suffer from the flu and they don't go to the hospital, they don't go to the doctor, they don't get tested, and even in some severe cases. Now, let's switch to COVID-19. Again, those were influenza. This is the influenza situation this flu season. So there are 675,243 confirmed cases. This was as of last night, and 34,562 deaths from COVID-19 so far since the beginning of the crisis in the United States. That's a case lethality rate of 5.1%, which is roughly half the case lethality rate for the flu based on confirmed cases. Now, again, we have to keep in mind that the CDC does not report case lethality for the flu. It uses the epidemiological estimates to calculate the death rate. If you apply the same extrapolation as applied by the CDC to flu illnesses this year, that would yield 106 million COVID-19 illnesses. Now, calculated that way, that puts the death rate at 0.63% from COVID-19. Again, the lethality of the SARS-CoV-2 virus is less than that of influenza, even if you look at it, the case fatality rate. Now, it's unlikely, and this is, when we talk about things being likely or unlikely, we have to have some sense of prior probability. I should say that my gut tells me that 106 million Americans who have, that they have not had or currently have, that group of people COVID-19. I can't imagine that 106 million Americans have been infected by this virus. It would be great if they would, because this would have implications for the degree of herd immunity discussed in my previous podcast, which would raise that herd immunity percentage up quite a lot. I haven't done the calculation, but it'd be interesting. Well, sort of ballparking it, it'd be in the 30-40% range, right? So that's pretty significant. And again, this is an estimate. But I want to emphasize that I'm applying the multiple to raise the issue about the reporting of relative risk, right? So consider that the standard estimate for asymptomatic and mild, that is cold-like illnesses from the SARS-CoV-2 virus is around 80%. Now, if we accept that number, that still represents 21 million flu-like illnesses from this virus, right? So 21 million actual COVID-19 cases. And that still seems like a large number. When it would still, but if it were that large, that'd still be significant for establishing the herd protection we need that when this virus comes back around. It is possible, if you think about it, that either asymptomatic or mild cases are a greater percentage of the total number of cases. So maybe that 80%, maybe it's closer to 90%. Or that the multiple is smaller for COVID-19 than it is for the flu. And if COVID's more deadly than the flu, then that would, make sense. In some way of thinking about relative risk. But the question we should be asking is, why has no multiple been applied to COVID-19 at all? Right? Now, the comeback will likely be that we haven't, as I said at the outset, we don't have the experience with this virus yet to approximate the number. But we do know that the number is significantly greater than 0, right? If 80% have no symptoms or only mild symptoms, and the majority of cases are not being tested. And there are many with severe illness that are not tested. They're just recovering at home the way they would with the flu. Remember, the vast majority of flu illnesses are not confirmed. They're estimated. So this obvious fact should be communicated clearly by authorities in the media. All reporting about deaths should emphasize this point. Or you could put the point another way. You could ask why is the multiple applied to the case of flu illnesses? And my guess is that, at least in part, if you had a 1 out of 10 case lethality rate for influenza, that would provoke calls for social distancing, sheltering in place, and quarantine for the flu. And that would make normal life impossible. But just look at the numbers, and every year the numbers are very large. So smartly, an epidemiological model is applied to reduce the rate of death from the illness so that people can understand the relative risk, or the risk from the flu is lower. All right? So the problem should be obvious. This is why I'm blogging about this and podcasting this, because it's shocking to me that the vast majority of this hasn't occurred to people. And we can't be so dependent on authorities in the media that we can't think for ourselves and have these things occur to us. I mean, the authorities and the media, they're comparing apples to oranges. And they're doing it in a direction that makes COVID-19 seem much more deadly than the flu. And to be sure, COVID-19 is deadly. It may be more deadly than the flu, but how much more deadly? For sure, it's not nearly as deadly as the case lethality rate makes it appear, since it's obvious that most cases of COVID-19 they go unreported. Whereas dead bodies from any flu-like illness rarely go unreported, at least not for long. So, a dead person is usually noticed. And we've seen that authorities are including in the COVID-19 deaths bodies that have not tested positive for SARS-CoV-2. So they're actually raising that case lethality rate without confirmation in many of those cases. All right, well, we estimate flu deaths. Flu deaths this year are estimated to be around 24,000. Clearly, not all those were tested, right? Far fewer would have been tested, proportionally speaking, as would be when you compare it to this much smaller number of confirmed tests for the flu in comparison to the estimates. It's thousands to millions in that case. Now, we really need the authorities to come clean on this discrepancy. This needs to be discussed. It needs to be the issue of the day. Not being clear about the relative risk of COVID-19 over against the flu feeds the panic used by the federal, state, and local governments to justify the sharp and unprecedented curtailment of freedom and democracy. It's very troubling. The way in which the population has accepted these claims, but they're relying on authorities and the media. So it's even more troubling that the government and the media would not be telling us those things. Anyway, I'm just building on the things that I've been writing about, podcasting about, and you can comment below this video, or you can visit my page. The address will be made available, and you can also see it there on the intro and the outro to this video. Anyway, Stay safe. Have a great day, and question authority.